You don't exactly look like the future. That's what she said. Word for word. No estute. No aire ni. Just those 7 syllables, glazed in lip gloss and dripping with the kind of corporate confidence only a trust fund and an MBA from somewhere with stone columns could produce. And she didn't whisper it, either. She said it across a 10-foot chrome conference table in a boardroom filled with glass, light, and 6-figure silence. A room built to impress people who confuse sleek with smart. She was 28. Blonde, surgically symmetrical, and freshly installed as Chief Innovation Officer, which apparently now means running a company like it's a lifestyle brand. I had 12 years in that building. 12 years in the trenches, quietly writing, filing, fixing, documenting. I had carried that place on my back while she was still tagging brunch photos and copy-pasting, disruptive, into PowerPoints. But in that moment, I wasn't a person. I was a prop that no longer fit the aesthetic. You're a valuable mind, she added, trying to soften the knife. But we're rebranding. Elevating our look. Our energy. We need faces that match the mission. You don't project that. I stared at her, still trying to decide if this was a prank. Maybe the board hired a satirist to spice up quarterly reviews. But no, she was serious. Dead serious. She even slid a folder across the table like this was some kind of polite resignation. Termination without cause. My reflection stared back at me from the polished table. Graying stubble. Cheap jacket. Tired eyes. Nothing glossy. Nothing elevated. I didn't even own a ring light. I didn't say a word. I just unclipped my badge, one I'd worn into labs at 3 a.m., into meetings where I saved million-dollar contracts with nothing but a flash drive and a broken printer. I folded my lab coat, creased, coffee-stained, sleeves frayed from too many years brushing against server racks and solder fumes, and placed it beside the badge. No fight. Just a nod. She blinked, like she hadn't expected it to be that easy. Like I was supposed to beg, plead, cry, rage. But the thing about being too plain is that you learn early how to hold the rage behind your teeth like a live wire. I didn't give her the show. She offered some closing line, something about fresh starts and no hard feelings. But I didn't hear it. I was already walking toward the elevator, leaving a trail of silence in a hallway filled with whispers. 12 years. 12 years of holding that company's secrets, building its backbone, documenting every fragile process that only I could fix when it inevitably broke. 12 years of being invisible when they needed a fall guy and irreplaceable when they needed a miracle. Now erased because I didn't match the mission. But what she didn't know, what no one in that smug little room of brand consultants and recycled buzzwords knew, was that I'd read every word of my contract. Not just the bolded ones. I'd inserted something 5 years ago, during one of the talent retention renegotiations they barely skimmed before signing. I called it an ethical failsafe. They called it whatever, just get back to work. The clause was simple. If my employment was terminated without cause, any patent I authored, solely or collaboratively, automatically reverted to me unless explicitly renegotiated within 60 days. They never renegotiated. They never even looked. And they sure as hell didn't know that the trauma response biotech system they were planning to unveil at the Defense Summit, the one they'd built their entire valuation around, had been authored by me, alone, under my name. I didn't steal a thing. I just let the countdown begin. By the time she snapped her laptop shut, satisfied with her little act of corporate cleansing, the fuse had already been lit. Quiet. Invisible. Just like me. And as I stepped out into the sunlit parking lot, wind in my face, hands empty, shoulders light, I felt something shift in the air. They thought they'd erased a man. What they'd done was remove the keystone. And now the whole structure was starting to lean that I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. I just walked. Slow and straight through the hushed hallways I'd walked 1,000 times before. Only this time every fluorescent light above me buzzed like it knew something was dying. I kept my eyes forward, not because I didn't hear the whispers, but because I wanted them to stew in the silence. She really fired him? Over how he looks? Didn't he write that whole trauma response patent? My name didn't come out of their mouths so much as it leaked, like guilt they hadn't figured out how to process yet. But no one stopped me. No one stepped forward. 12 years of answering late-night calls, fixing emergency code bugs, saving presentations with missing slides, and when the axe dropped, they just watched. One girl, new maybe a year in, clutched her coffee cup like a prayer and gave me a tiny nod. That was the only gesture of humanity in the entire building. When I reached the exit, I paused, not to look back, but to breathe in what I knew would be the last moment before the avalanche started. See, they thought I was leaving empty-handed. Just a man in a wrinkled shirt with a stapled exit packet and a badge that no longer beeped. What they didn't realize was that my departure was an event. A silent one, but irreversible. Because somewhere, buried in a dry paragraph in my employment contract, Section 14.2 Subclause D, was a clause no one had paid attention to when I negotiated it 5 years ago, back when I was pulling 16-hour days to save their first DoD bid, and they were desperate to keep me from jumping to a rival. I called it the ethical failsafe. They called it fine whatever, just sign it and get back to work. And now it was live. Triggered the moment my employment ended without cause. The failsafe didn't delete anything. That would have been too petty, too obvious. Instead, it reverted. Quietly, cleanly, legally. All patents filed with my name on them, especially the defense medical hybrid system they planned to showcase at Q3, automatically transferred their registration out of the company's IP vault and into mine. The reversion was like a pressure-sensitive mine. Undetectable until stepped on. And the CEO's daughter, with her TikTok-filtered vision and smug MBA certificate, had just stomped right on it in heels. The door hissed closed behind me, and I stepped into the parking lot, the air thick with that Midwest humidity that made your shirt cling to your spine. The building loomed behind me, glass and steel trying to pretend it wasn't hollowing out from the inside. My car, 1999 Civic, cracked dash, radio permanently stuck on classic rock, looked wildly out of place next to the C-suite's leased Teslas. I slid into the driver's seat and let the engine sputter to life. As I pulled out, I caught one last glimpse of my reflection in the rearview. Lined, plain, unimpressive. Exactly what she said didn't fit the brand. But here's the thing about plain things. They don't attract attention until they disappear. And by the time you realize what they were holding up, it's already too late. 3 days. That's how long it took before the first hairline fracture appeared in the marble facade of their precious little rebrand. Just 72 hours of pretending nothing happened before someone in legal finally looked close enough at the filings to notice the abyss staring back. It started with a ripple. A few backdated emails getting bumped in priority. A compliance ping marked non-standard transfer event in the patent database. And then, just like that, a hard confirmation from the digital ledger that the trauma response system, the same one they had plastered all over their investor deck last quarter, was no longer under company ownership. Gone. Transferred. Not stolen. Not lost. Reverted. The legal team, bless their overpaid panic, rushed to contain it. At first, they flagged it as a possible error in the intellectual property ledger, a data sync issue, they claimed. Then someone whispered, internal sabotage. And suddenly desks started to clear a little faster, eyes got shiftier. And every line of code ever written under my name got run through forensic analysis like I was the Zodiac killer. The CEO's daughter, predictably, played it off with her usual blend of clueless charisma and influencer-level denial. At an internal Q&A, she laughed it off, told the crowd it was just a clerical glitch, and reassured them that our legal team is on it. She even added a wink at the end. A wink. As if that would plug the billion-dollar hole tearing open beneath her heels. Meanwhile, I was sitting at home on my couch in the same flannel pajamas I'd had since 2011, sipping coffee thick enough to stain concrete, watching it all unfold through second-hand screenshots and whispered messages from the few former co-workers who still had souls. I didn't gloat. Not outwardly. But that first flicker of grim satisfaction lit something in me. A confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the years I spent hunched over those documents, embedding contingencies no one bothered to read, hadn't been for nothing. They had underestimated me right into irrelevance, and now they were choking on their own oversight. But the real turning point wasn't the internal panic. It was the board. Because once the legal flags turned into formal alerts, once the weekly portfolio reports came back missing their shiny gold centerpiece, The board started asking questions. The kind of questions that don't get answered with winks. Why did this transfer happen? Who approved that clause? Why weren't we told about it? Who's responsible? And that's when the paper-thin veneer of control began to peel. Because no one had answers. The lawyers were too busy sweating through their designer shirts. The compliance officer was halfway through crafting his resignation letter. And the CEO's daughter? She was still trying to figure out whether she could pivot the brand narrative fast enough to distract from the crater she'd created. But you can't pivot around a missing $1.2 billion asset. You can't gaslight a ledger. And back in my quiet little kitchen, I sat with that coffee, lukewarm, bitter, honest, and thought, there it is. The first crack. Right on schedule. The house wasn't on fire yet. But the wiring was sparking. And no one inside had any clue which wall was about to cave in first. By the end of the week, the whispers had become full-blown tremors. You could hear the cracks forming just by scrolling through LinkedIn. The investors weren't angry yet. They were concerned, which in corporate terms is worse. Anger burns fast. Concern lingers. Concern spreads. Concern picks up the phone at 2 a.m. and starts lining up exit options. The rumor was out. The company had lost its crown jewel. Not sold it. Not licensed it. Lost it. The trauma response patent, the one they had promised would revolutionize battlefield medicine, secure 10 years of defense contracts, and bump their valuation into the stratosphere, had disappeared from their balance sheet like Houdini in a hurricane. And the more they tried to hide it, the more obvious it became. To try and patch the leak, the CEO's daughter did what all collapsing figureheads do. She staged a theater production and called it an all-hands meeting. Employees were herded into the atrium like cattle being asked to clap at their own auction. Lights dimmed, music played. Someone said she even wore white, like it was a goddamn revival meeting instead of a crisis. She stood up there and blamed sabotage. That was her word. Not miscommunication. Not clerical oversight. Sabotage. As if some shadowy figure had broken in through the vents and flipped a patent switch. As if I'd donned a ski mask and snuck into their data vault like it was Mission Impossible. I watched the live stream from home. Yes, they were arrogant enough to stream it publicly, still clinging to the illusion that confidence would save them. Her voice was the same manicured charm I remembered, trying to spin chaos into strategy. She said phrases like unexpected asset displacement and internal vulnerability exploitation. Every sentence was like watching someone try to put out a fire with a can of hairspray. She paused after dropping the word sabotage. Let it hang in the air like she expected applause. None came. Just the faint shuffle of uncomfortable shoes on polished tile. And then it happened. A compliance officer. I knew the guy, glasses too big for his face, used to shadow me on documentation reviews, stood up. He looked pale. Sweaty. The way someone looks when they realize their entire career might hinge on whether or not they tell the truth. And he told it. In front of the whole room, on record, on camera, he said, the patent transfer was not unauthorized. It was executed via a legal clause tied to the original authorship agreement. No sabotage occurred. It was automatic. No one moved. You could hear the hum of the AIC cutting through the dead air. She tried to pivot, I'll give her that. Tried to spin it as a misunderstood legacy clause, but by then it was too late. You don't come back from a compliance officer publicly detonating your narrative. The media picked it up within the hour. Investors started making calls to people they'd ghosted months ago. Government procurement contacts began asking very pointed questions about IP continuity. And me? I sat back on my couch with the remote in one hand, and the sound muted. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd written the script years ago. There was no joy in it. No celebración. Just a deep, quiet rightness. A confirmation of how paper-thin her empire really was. It didn't surprise me. None of it did. That was the sad part. She had fired me for being too plain. But the system she inherited was never designed to survive a spotlight. Now the lights were on, and everything she thought was polished was turning to dust in real time. All I had to do was watch. By Monday, the company was holding more emergency meetings than actual work sessions. The building, once a glass and steel temple to disruption, now looked like a crime scene. Every room was booked solid. Lights on at all hours. Executives pacing, whispering in corners like hostages deciding who to eat first. The lawyers were the first to break. Their strategy, if you could call it that, was to brute force reality. Challenge the transfer. Claim ambiguity. Dig through contract archives, praying to find a typo or technicality that would let them roll back the failsafe like it was some harmless software bug. Spoiler: there wasn't one. I'd written it clean. Ironclad. Bulletproof. And worse for them, the company's own legal team had signed off on it back when I was still their quiet little workhorse, and they were too busy pitching the next funding round to read the fine print. Now they were gasping like fish on the deck, flipping through clause after clause trying to undo the knife they'd twisted into themselves. It was almost poetic, watching them scramble to undo paperwork that only existed because they once feared losing me. They feared it so much they agreed to a clause they didn't understand. And then, when I didn't look valuable anymore, they fired me anyway. Meanwhile, on the floor, the real floor, the engineering and compliance trenches, the employees weren't hiding their anxiety anymore. People were pissed. Loudly, grumbling in elevators, whispering in shared Slack threads, venting in hushed bathroom mirror conversations. Wait, wasn't he the one who ran the cross-department data map? Yeah, and the trauma integration logs. He built those frameworks from scratch. I thought that was all documented? Nope. No central repo. It was him. He was the system. I was becoming a myth in real time. The ghost in the machine they'd flushed out, now pulsing in every corrupted file, every integration error, every panicked client call. One dev posted a joke on their private Discord. When you uninstall the brains and expect the legs to walk, oops. I screenshotted it. Saved it in a folder titled Unforced Errors. And through it all, I felt a cold amusement settle over me like frost on a window pane. Not joy. Not revenge. Just the crystallized irony of it all. I remembered every time they passed me over for promotion because I lacked polish. Every meeting where I explained something technical only to have it reworded by someone shinier and louder, then fed to the boardroom as innovation. Every team photo I was cropped out of because my jacket didn't match the palette. They wanted bright and marketable. They wanted flashy. What they didn't want was me. Now all the brightness in the world couldn't distract from the smell of rot. Because the damage was going public. First came a few anonymous tips to industry blogs. Then a tweet from a VC insider. Hearing a major defense startup may have just fumbled a 10-figure asset over a vanity firing. Wild. Retweets. Comments. Parody accounts. A former employee even leaked a photo of the whiteboard scrawl during the emergency IP meeting. Written in panicked all caps. Who authorized this? They were bleeding out in front of the internet, and the vultures had started circling. Clients weren't calling. They were demanding. Contracts stalled. Renewals paused. The polite silences of business had turned into screaming inboxes and unreturned calls. And me? I was still silent. Because the beautiful thing about a spiral is, it doesn't need a push. Just gravity. And they'd already jumped. They started texting around midnight. First just one or two. Then a slow, pathetic cascade of hey, just checking in messages from people who once wouldn't even share an elevator with me unless their AirPods died. What did you do? Are you okay? They're saying you stole it. Please tell me that's not true. Legal is in full meltdown. People are saying it's you. That last one made me laugh. Now they say it's me. When I was underpaid, overlooked, and barely thanked for cleaning up a decade's worth of technical debt. Then I was no one. But now that the golden patent had vanished into thin air, suddenly I had a name again. A face. A mythos. I didn't respond. Let them sit in the silence I once had to choke on every damn day. Then at 3:12 a.m., the name lit up my phone. Her. No text. A direct call. I stared at the screen for a moment. Not surprised. Not angry. Just curious. Curious how much delusion could fit into one phone call. I picked up. Her voice came through calm, on the surface. Too calm. The kind of calm you only get from someone who's been crying in a luxury bathroom stall for 20 minutes. Hey, I know things have gotten a little weird, she began, like we were old friends discussing a scheduling conflict. There's been a misunderstanding. A miscommunication. But we don't have to let this spiral into something messy. I let her talk. She needed the illusion of control like oxygen. We're open to negotiating, she said. There's still a place for you if you're interested. We can figure out a consulting role, revisit your compensation, even restore authorship recognition. This doesn't have to be adversarial. Her voice faltered on that last word. She was trying so hard to sound like a CEO. But desperation leaks through the seams no matter how expensive the blazer. I waited, counted to 3, then replied. You fired me for how I looked, I said, voice low even. Said I didn't fit your brand. So why would your brand ever want me back? Dead silence on the other end. You could almost hear the sound of a $1.2 billion valuation disintegrating in her throat. I didn't sabotage anything, I added after a pause. What happened wasn't a hack, or a breach, or a hostile act. It was a clause. In a contract. Signed by your own legal team. Still silent. You handed me the keys years ago, I said. And then fired me for being boring. That wasn't sabotage. That was bad management. She tried once more, softly, this time. We can fix this. Together. Just come back. Please. The word please from her mouth almost short-circuited my brain. The same mouth that once told me my vibe was off-brand. I didn't scream. Didn't gloat. I just said, good luck, and hung up. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and watched the city breathe in the distance. The lights were still on over at HQ. Probably would be till sunrise. Maybe longer. I thought about all the times they called me invisible. And now here they were, staring into a hole they couldn't fill, looking for a shadow they pushed out themselves. The best part? I wasn't hiding. They just weren't smart enough to see me. ChatGPT's Gazal. It hit the front page of Tech Ledger at 9:03 a.m. Not a whisper, not a rumor, but a headline in bold black ink like a guillotine. Company loses control of $1.2 billion patent after firing veteran researcher. Below it, my face. Blurry, cropped from some long-forgotten conference photo where I was standing off to the side, holding a binder, not smiling. They didn't even have a proper headshot, because no one ever thought I'd matter enough for one. The article didn't pull punches. It laid out everything. The abrupt termination, the patent transfer, the failsafe clause buried in my contract. A clean, legal reversion of rights triggered by a termination without cause. No hacking. No theft. Just oversight, signed in ink by their own legal team half a decade ago. It should have been dry, technical, forgettable. But the headline caught fire. Within an hour it was on Twitter, then Reddit, then LinkedIn. By noon, the memes had taken over. The CEO's daughter, once their shining star, had become a walking punchline. One viral post showed her standing in front of a whiteboard, eyes wide, under the caption, "When you fire the nerd and lose the code." Another slapped her face onto a perfume ad mock-up. Ode to sabotage, now with 20% less due diligence. Even TikTok got involved. Some finance bro in suspenders lip-synced her investor call, while sipping rose and captioned it. Valuation, $1.2 billion. Due diligence, 0. Damage control in progress. But the one that hit hardest? A split screen. Her LinkedIn glamour shot beside my grainy badge photo. Top caption, the brand. Bottom, the brains. It stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were late. Everything they were mocking now, I'd known years ago. I had sat through meetings where she used the word synergy, like a magic spell. I'd watched as she posted photos of herself on the company jet, tagging captions like building the future one pitch at a time, while I sat in a windowless lab fighting with hardware that didn't want to exist. And now the internet had finally caught up. Still, the satisfaction I felt wasn't sweet, it was dark, bitter. A shadow on the wall that never left, even after the lights turned off. Because it didn't have to go this way. She could have asked. Could have listened. I would have trained her. Would have handed her everything, gladly even. I didn't want power. I wanted purpose. But she didn't want a partner. She wanted an ornament. Something she could pose beside, and then discard when the lighting wasn't right. And so she did. And now? Now the government wanted a word. Inquiries started slow. A vague email from a Department of Defense liaison requesting clarification on patent ownership. Then a second message, this one marked urgent, asking for confirmation that all sensitive medical defense assets had not been compromised in the IP transition. By nightfall, the calls were coming straight from DC. Because this wasn't just a failed product line. This was battlefield tech. Trauma response systems built for live combat. The Pentagon didn't take kindly to sudden ownership shifts, especially not when tied to personal drama and executive incompetence. Somewhere in a locked conference room, I imagined the board scrambling to keep up, trying to explain to government auditors how the cornerstone of their defense partnership now legally belonged to the man they fired for not being on brand. I didn't reply to the press. Didn't take interviews. I didn't need to. The world was saying everything for me. Loudly. And she was disappearing. Social media gone dark. PR firm issuing bland statements. LinkedIn updates frozen in time like a ghost town. One last post pinned. Excited to lead us into the next chapter. Turns out, the next chapter didn't have her in it. It had me. Whether I wanted it or not. By the time Friday rolled around, the stock graph looked like a heartbeat monitor flatlining in real time. Red. Jagged. Relentless. Each dip a nail in the coffin. By noon, they'd lost over 40% of their market cap. By 2, the investor exodus had become a stampede. Capital vaporizing like spit on a skillet. And still they tried to spin it. PR rolled out empty phrases like momentary disruption and undergoing realignment. But you can't polish a corpse, and the autopsy was already on every financial news ticker from Bloomberg to BuzzFeed. Behind the glass walls, chaos wasn't just whispering, it was screaming. The CEO lost it first. Screamed at the board during an emergency meeting, so loud someone across the street tweeted about hearing it through a third-floor window. A direct quote made its way online. "This is a goddamn coup. Why didn't anyone stop her?" Her, of course, being his daughter. She had been quiet up until then. Bracing. Deflecting. Trying to hide behind soft words and sleepless eyes. But when the DoD sent a third request, this one not so polite, demanding immediate clarification on IP ownership and usage rights, she broke. Mid-meeting. Crying, hands shaking, mascara carving trenches down her face. A trust fund collapse, live and in color. The legal director resigned that same day. Walked out with a single folder. Didn't even stop to clear his desk. Rumor says he left a sticky note on his monitor that read, "We advised against the firing. You overruled us. Good luck." Meanwhile, I was home, still in sweatpants, coffee in hand, watching a live stream clip of a press conference where the company's interim spokesperson said they were working cooperatively with government agencies and legacy collaborators. Legacy collaborator? That was me apparently. Funny how your name becomes sacred once it's carved into the bones of everything they're losing. And then came the offer. A private firm. Fronted by lawyers. Backed by silence. They wanted to negotiate a temporary reallocation of patent control. In exchange for a figure so obscene it didn't fit on a single check. Stock options. Backdated bonuses. A re-entry package that would have made my younger self cry. All I had to do was sign. Quietly. Discreetly. No interviews. No media. Just smile, cash in, give them the damn crown jewel back, so they could stop the bleeding. I didn't even need time to think. I typed 2 sentences. Simple. Clean. No emouschin. You wanted me gone. Consider your wish granted. I hit send. And then I closed the laptop. No second drafts. No backtracking. I wasn't doing this to be a hero. I wasn't trying to be righteous. I just remembered vividly, standing in that glass boardroom weeks ago. Being told I didn't fit the brand by a woman who'd never built a thing in her life. And now the brand was burning, the board was panicking, and the only person who could save them had already packed up his toolbox and walked away. I didn't light the fire. I just took the extinguisher with me. Let them choke on the smoke. The final nail wasn't loud. There was no press conference, no dramatic handshake. Just a digital signature, a quiet ping from my email, and a confirmation screen that read, "License transfer complete." I'd spent 2 weeks fielding offers behind closed doors. No media, no leaks. Just polished shoes, tailored suits, and competing proposals slid across tables like poker hands. But one stood out, clean, lean, and sharp as a scalpel. A rival firm. Smaller. Smarter. Run by people who still wore hoodies to meetings and didn't give a damn about brand cohesion. They didn't want a mascot. They wanted a mind. So I gave them the crown jewel. Licensed it outright. Retained authorship, residuals, a permanent seat at the table, but never a desk. I'd had enough desks. With that one act, I secured my future and detonated theirs. Because the moment the transfer finalized, their value, what was left of it, flatlined for good. The board called an emergency meeting that lasted 23 minutes. The CEO resigned halfway through, face gray, voice broken. No statement. Just gone. And her? She vanished. Deleted her socials. Removed from the company website. Last anyone heard, she was spotted sobbing into a mimosa at a spa retreat in Sedona, muttering something about not being built for this kind of betrayal. Betrayal? That's rich. The company was gutted within the month. Contracts pulled. Clients gone. Government deals dead on arrival. The headquarters, once a shimmering shrine to innovation, now sat half vacant. Lit by automatic timers and haunted by the echo of what could have been. Meanwhile, I sat in a cafe downtown. Small place. No Wi-Fi. Just chipped mugs, good bread, and the kind of coffee that doesn't try to impress you. I liked that. My phone buzzed on the table once. Transfer confirmed. I didn't smile. Didn't toast. I just breathed. In and out. Calm. Across the street, a digital billboard still cycled through the company's old marketing campaign. A slogan she wrote, in all caps. The future looks bright. But there was no future left to look at. They had fired the foundation because it didn't sparkle. Because it wasn't pretty enough for the pitch deck. Because I didn't wear the right suit or have the right jawline or speak in curated soundbites. They mistook quiet for expendable. Mistook substance for simplicity. Mistook me for plain. Turns out, I wasn't the plain one. I was the foundation. And they tore it out. And the whole palace fell.